Josh Hasten here, Israel Uncensored, on the Land of Israel Network at thelandofisrael.com. It is Monday, the 28th of October, 2019, the 29th of Tishrei, 5780. Hope you're doing well in your part of the world. It has been such a long time since we have spoken, with all of the Jewish holidays this year, basically all of them falling out on a Monday. I have recorded my show once over the past month. Hope for those of you who were celebrating the high holidays, you had a joyous festival, you had a meaningful festival, whether it was Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, whatever it was. Hope you did something fun, inspiring, important, something to contribute to the world. Hope you had a good time. I certainly did. Sometimes you take it for granted, but just getting to tour the land of Israel is such a blessing, and I got the opportunity to do that over the Sukkot holiday. Anyway, don't forget, you can always get in touch with me, Josh, at thelandofisrael.com. On Facebook, it's Joshua Hasten, or my page, Josh Hasten, Israel Advocacy and Journalism. On Twitter, at Josh Hasten, and now on Instagram as well. I am here today in Jerusalem, just a few hundred meters from the walls of the Old City. I'm here with an old friend who has been on the show. I don't know if this particular version of one of my programs, he's been on before, Rabbi Yehuda HaKohen, from the Vision Alliance, Brit Hazon. He joins us now here in Jerusalem. Rabbi Yehuda HaKohen, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me, Josh.
So if you can, let the audience know, what is Brit Hazon, the Vision Alliance?
Brit Hazon, or the Vision Alliance, is really about trying to figure out what's next for the Jewish people after the successes of Zionism. Meaning, we're coming from the perspective that Zionism was an incredible revolution that completely changed the situation of the Jewish people. It ingathered a broken and scattered people back from the four corners of the world to the homeland we had been displaced from, something that no other people in history has achieved. It revived a dead language to everyday use. It liberated our country from the British, which is not unique to us, but if you think about what the Jewish people was in the 1940s and what the British Empire was in the 1940s, I think it's still a remarkable feat. And then in 1967, we returned to Jerusalem, we returned to the cradle of Jewish civilization, and then our revolution seems to have stopped. And I represent a group, Brit Hazon, which believes very strongly that our revolution is not over, and Zionism merely created the conditions for the Hebrew revolution to continue.
So let me ask you this. I mean, you're talking about a large period of time. You're talking about 52 plus years. Mm-hmm. Are you saying that essentially things came to a halt 52 years ago? I mean, we have so much development in Israel over the last 52 years, so much Torah learning, so much building, so much agriculture, so much, so many different Zionist groups who are doing great work for the land of Israel and its people. So what exactly are we talking about here during that 52-year, what would sound like to be a void, perhaps, in that Zionist vision?
Right. I think that there are certainly a lot of initiatives that have taken place over the last 52 years that in many ways result from the achievements, but the actual fundamental achievements of driving our people's liberation forward has sort of been paused. I would say that that's because Zionism ended and we're waiting for something new. And a lot of the work that I'm involved with is trying to educate the next generation to see themselves as thought leaders of a new Jewish liberation movement that comes in the wake of Zionism, utilizes the successes of Zionism, the conditions that Zionism created in order to formulate what they believe, first of all, the goals of Jewish history are, what's already been achieved, what's left to accomplish, and what they can do to be characters in the story of accomplishing the remaining goals. And just like Zionism had many different rival ideological streams, I think that this post-Zionist Jewish liberation movement will also have many different tendencies, many different ideological tendencies, and that's okay. And I think the friction between those tendencies, just like with Zionism, Zionism was propelled forward largely through the friction between the various tendencies, labor Zionism, religious Zionism, revisionist Zionism, cultural Zionism, etc. So too, this kind of post-Zionist Jewish liberation movement, if it has rival tendencies, will also, utilize the friction to propel forward. And we don't have to all agree on what the goals are, but we all have to agree that there need to be goals that we set for ourselves as a collective that we try to achieve politically, practically, in history, in order to essentially turn the state of Israel from a caterpillar into a butterfly.
So if you can give some specifics, and I'm asking you this because there are organizations out there, let's say like the New Israel Fund, and implied in the name New Israel Fund is that there's a problem with the current Israel as it is, as in there's an old Israel and a new Israel, and they have their vision, which I don't subscribe to, in terms of changing Israel towards their, whatever it is, their political leanings, their ideologies or whatnot. So if you can, tell me how specifically and practically your vision of, I don't want to call it a new Israel, but of a revitalization of that Zionism which you just described. Practically, what are you doing on the ground?
Okay, so practically we have a lot of educational initiatives, and those educational initiatives breed different activist initiatives. But the truth is I consider education to be activism as well, because education activates. And at the end of the day, through educational work, you raise the consciousness of people, and through raising the consciousness of people, you get them involved in organizing and trying to change the world and change history, drive history forward. New Israel Fund is kind of ironic because in many ways they're trying to revive the old Israel. They're afraid of the new Israel. Like the New Israel Fund as an institution is afraid of the new Israel they see rising, which is part of, I would say it may be in the terminology of our sages, I would say that Zionism is the movement of Mashiach ben Yosef. Like the Gaon of Vilna, basically in Kol HaTor, talks about Mashiach ben Yosef being the physical, material rebuilding of the Jewish people. In the Kabbalistic literature, Yosef is like the part of Israeli identity, part of Hebrew identity that represents what we share in common with the other nations of the world, an army, a government, agriculture, economy, etc. And it's kind of concerned with the material well-being of the Jewish people, high-tech security, etc. Yehuda represents the force that is focused on what's different about us, what's unique about us, our unique culture, our unique worldview, our unique destiny. And, throughout history, we've seen this friction, even in ancient Israel, when you had the kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Yehuda. The kingdom of Israel was, for the most part, ruled by Yosef, like people from the tribe of Ephraim, which is one of the sub-tribes of Yosef. And, the kingdom of Israel was the more strong, economically, diplomatically, militarily strong kingdom, and the more relevant kingdom in its time. Whereas the kingdom of Judah, even though the kingdom of Judah, which was much more connected to the identity of Israel, the goals of Israel, the worldview of Israel, the practices, the culture, the nevuah of Israel, but in its time, it was considered a very irrelevant backwater kingdom, kind of landlocked, not really on the trade routes, not on the coast like Israel was, not really acting on the world stage the way Israel was. But from a historical perspective, we remember the kingdom of Judah as the more important kingdom, the more relevant kingdom. And I think this friction plays itself out throughout our history. And now in Israeli society, we kind of see this friction between Yosef, which is essentially Zionism, which built the state, which built the institutions, built the army, etc., and this kind of, but wasn't really connected to the internal identity and mission of Israel. But now you have this force that really rose up as a result of Zionism's successes that is much more connected to our identity, much more connected to our destiny, much more connected to our historic mission. And this is like the force of Yehuda. And there's this friction. I would say that almost every political disagreement within Israeli society is an expression of a deep friction between the forces of Jewish nationalism and Western liberalism. And I think in order to move forward, instead of one side trying to win out at the expense of the other, we need to kind of transcend the ostensible opposites and reach kind of a synthesis of what I would call Hebrew universalism, which is based in uniquely Jewish sources coming from our roots, our identity, our worldview, our culture, etc., like from our civilization, but is able to challenge Western liberalism according to the values and morals of it. meaning that we're able to come out so you asked for practical examples. Minority rights. Right now when we talk about our situation with the Palestinians, some of us relate to the Palestinians as just like an enemy nation in our land and we're fighting them like it's an ethnic conflict. Some of us relate to the Palestinians as an ethnic minority in our country that's mistreated, right? Like meaning how we relate to the Palestinian question, first of all, depends on how we contextualize the Palestinian question. Are they just like an oppressed minority in our society, or are they an enemy nation that participated in attempts to wipe us out? And our response to them or our positions on how to engage them often result from how we're contextualizing, our relationship with them. And maybe it's a little of both, meaning maybe both have truth to them. And when we have this discussion on minority rights when it comes to Palestinians or any other people here, the conversation in Israeli society is essentially whether or not we accept or reject the Western concept of minority rights, or the Western notion of minority rights. Instead of saying, wait a minute, the children of Israel has a unique approach to minority rights that might be different from the Western approach and might actually be more just, universally more just, but certainly more just or more relevant or appropriate to the cultures and identities and values of the peoples of this region, including Palestinians and others.
I think that's an important point right now as we're sitting here in Jerusalem, because at the same time, J Street, the organization, is right now having their conference in Washington, and I would highly doubt that they are approaching the issue of the Arabs who are living under the Palestinian Authority with that mind frame. In other words, what you said in terms of their viewing this as, in terms of Western liberalism, that's the approach I have no doubt that they're taking, as opposed to what you said, perhaps, which is potentially our approach, would actually might be more just than their approach.
Even for the minorities themselves.
Yes, exactly.
They might appreciate it more. So I think one of the questions we really have to ask ourselves is, first of all, what makes a state Jewish? Or even what makes a state democratic? Because a lot of the friction we feel is like between Jewish state and democratic state or whatever. And I would say, first of all, the way I define democracy is a system that empowers people to influence the structures they live under. That's democracy for me. Any system, voting or not voting, the voting to me is irrelevant. I want to feel that I can influence the structures and systems I live under, and if I feel that way, I feel empowered with democratic rights. And that's democracy for me. But Jewish state, which I think is a much more a complicated question, we have to ask, what makes a state Jewish? Because right now what we have is a European-style nation-state with Jewish decorations on it. Essentially, we defeated the British, essentially the Lechi, the Lochamei Cherut Israel, the fighters for the freedom of Israel, or the Stern Gang. They defeated the British. They forced the British to leave. They also succeeded in dragging the Irgun Tzvai Leumi and even the Palmach and the Haganah for a brief moment behind them into war with the British. But they forced the British to leave, and we declared a state. And then but what we really did was we took down the British flag and we put a Jewish flag on a British system. We didn't ask ourselves, well, what makes a state Jewish, like on a deep level? Right now we have a European-style nation-state with Jewish decorations, and those Jewish decorations are not Jewish enough for the Haredim, for the ultra-Orthodox population, which is important because they're the fastest-growing population between the river and the sea, and they're ultimately going to become part of this, so they become increasingly relevant, every time we have this conversation. And the decorations are too Jewish for the non-Jewish population. So I'm wondering if we can find a way to first of all, define for ourselves what makes a state Jewish deeply. Like in what ways can a nation state in the 21st century express the values of our people in its policies and in its institutions in such a way that every Haredi child recognizes the deep Jewishness of the state and non-Jews barely notice it's Jewish. Like in the United States, for example, America is a very, very Christian country. Mm-hmm. And that's deeply rooted in the structures of the United States. But the average person walking around in America on any given Tuesday isn't feeling he's living in a Christian state because it's soft. So I'm wondering if the Jewish character of our state can become a lot deeper than it is right now, while at the same time a lot softer than it is right now. So those of us who are Jewishly aware feel the Jewishness of the state in everything that we do and see and experience, and those who are disconnected from Jewish identity or aren't Jewish at all would barely even recognize these things.
Well, we are short on time here, but Rabbi Yehuda HaKohen with the Vision Alliance, Brit Hazon, This is pretty deep stuff, and I want people to be able to get in touch with you, reach out to you to learn how they can get involved with your movement, how they can get some of your educational materials, how can they understand, because this is not easy stuff. This is complicated stuff. How they can understand these concepts better. What's the best way to reach out to you? Do you do any traveling perhaps to the U.S. as well? Maybe for college kids or other communities in terms of understanding where your group is coming from. What's the best way to reach out to you? And maybe do you have a trip planned in the near future?
Yeah, Josh. I travel to the States roughly 3-4 times a year, usually university campus tours. The best way to get in touch with me is, well, first of all, we have a magazine. The Brit Hazon, the Vision Alliance, has a magazine. It's called Vision Magazine at visionmag.org. visionmag.org. There's also a podcast that I do every other week that's connected to that. It's called The Next Stage. You can see it, I guess you can go to any of the relevant platforms, SoundCloud, Apple, Spotify, whatever. I don't do the technical side of this. I just, I perform. And so the next stage, usually the show notes are usually on Vision Magazine itself. So just go to visionmag.org and you should be able to find everything there. You can find me on Facebook or Instagram or wherever. And Brit Hazon is BRIT-HAZON.org. But really, you could also listeners can always reach out to me through you, get in touch with Josh and contact me if you're interested in hearing more about how we can drive Jewish history forward. Absolutely, you can get in touch with me to reach Rabbi Yehuda HaKohen, the Vision Alliance, Brit Hazon. I thank you so much for your time. It's great having you back on the show. Let's do this again very, very soon. Thanks, Josh. We are coming to you from Jerusalem, the capital of the Jewish people. My name is Josh Hasten. This is Israel Uncensored on the Land of Israel Network at thelandofisrael.com. We're going to take a short break and come back with everything going on in the world of news here in Israel and the Middle East. Don't forget, you can get in touch with me, Josh, at thelandofisrael.com, on Facebook. It's Joshua Hasten or Josh Hasten Israel Advocacy and Journalism, on Twitter at Josh Hasten, and on Instagram. Short break, and we're coming right back.
Zionism, political and secular, says Ben-Gurion, held that Israel must be redeemed by its own efforts and by natural agency, that the Jewish people on its own must create the foundations of a new life. Well, I'm definitely looking to found a new life for my people in the land, although I'm not so sure we can do it on our own. As I'm Rav Mike Foyer, and this is The Jewish Story.
Join Rav Mike Foyer for the best Jewish history podcast, The Jewish Story, on the Land of Israel Network at thelandofisrael.com.
And we are back. Josh Hasten here, Israel Uncensored, on the Land of Israel Network at thelandofisrael.com. Thanks again to Rabbi Yehuda HaKohen for the interview. And did you wake up this morning perhaps feeling that the world was just a little bit better? Just a little bit of a better place this morning? I certainly did, reading here the news that ISIS leader al-Baghdadi was killed yesterday by American forces. A little less evil in the world, I will say, according to the Jerusalem Post and news agencies. U.S. President Donald Trump delivered a special announcement on Sunday informing the world of the death of ISIS leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi in an American special ops raid. Prime Minister Netanyahu congratulated Trump for eliminating Baghdadi, calling it an impressive achievement. Netanyahu, who released a statement within moments of the completion of Trump's press conference, said that it, quote, reflects our shared determination of the U.S. and all free states to fight terrorist organization and terrorist states. Now, there's no doubt that somebody will be taking over once the dust settles over there in the world of ISIS. But that being said, it's just the world is just a little bit better this morning. So certainly good news from the U.S. and President Trump that the top ISIS leader was eliminated in Syria the other day. Here on the local front, last night, the IDF spokesman's office reports that security forces arrested 13 Arabs suspected of terror activity in El Arub, that is just south of the Gush Etzion junction. If you're driving from Gush Etzion to Hebron, and you look over there to the left, you see an Arab village there, where on a nearly daily basis, there is rock throwing, firebomb throwing, attempted murder, targeting Israeli cars in the area on Kvish Shishim, Route 60. So 13 Arabs arrested overnight. An M16 confiscated. I wonder what they had planned to do with an M16. The mission was part of a larger scale operation to crack down on rock and firebomb throwing directed at Israeli traffic on Route 60. This reported by a news service called Chadashot Bitachon Sadeh. It is a field called Field Security News. But they got this from the IDF spokesman's unit, indicating that they are cracking down in the Gush Etzion area when it comes to rock and firebomb throwing. Of course, that is something that I personally appreciate very, very much, and my neighbors do as well. And it's good to see the IDF taking serious action and having the green light to take serious action against those who throw rocks, because rocks can kill and rocks have killed. So very, very important operation. Other good news here. Israel National News, Arut Sheva, reports that Israel's Ariel University in Samaria, the sole full-fledged Israeli university in Judea or Samaria, opened its new medical department on Sunday. A special ceremony was held, drawing VIP representatives from Israel, the Israeli government, and the American government as well, namely U.S. Ambassador to Israel David Friedman, who attended the opening ceremony, along with American Jewish billionaire and philanthropist Sheldon Adelson and his wife Miriam. Other government ministers, MKs, were in attendance as well. 70 students were accepted into the first class. It's actually called the Dr. Miriam and Sheldon Adelson School of Medicine at Ariel University. David Friedman, Ambassador Friedman, made the Shechianu blessing, the traditional Jewish blessing when you reach a milestone. He said the new medical center has been opened in Samaria, and then he said, that's worth repeating. A new medical school has been opened in Samaria. How many people ever thought they'd hear those words? Ambassador Friedman is amazing. He is great. No doubt about it. He said the U.S. Embassy enjoys warm ties with Ariel University. We get inspiration from its contributions to Israeli society and the world of science. After the ceremony, Friedman tweeted the new medical school would benefit all in the region, including both Jews and Arabs. For those who accuse Israel of being an apartheid state, go visit Ariel University and see how many Arabs are studying towards their bachelor's or master's or are now becoming doctors over there in Samaria. Right? Israel, the evil apartheid state. Go to Ariel University, or any university really, and see how accommodating the institutions of higher learning are for people of all stripes. Go check that out. In other news, the Jerusalem Post, this was from yesterday's paper, reported on the UN investigator. What is it? What is a UN investigator? How do you qualify to become a UN investigator? Is there only one UN investigator? Does anybody know anything about this? Oh, he's a UN special investigator. That's his name. That's his title. Michael Link. He told reporters at the UN in New York that the way towards peace in this area, of course, the starting point is a complete ban on all goods and services produced in Judea and Samaria. That's the way towards peace, right? Ban Jewish products. Shut down Jewish companies. Send the Arabs, by the way, who work there, send them home so their families can't earn a living. That is the way towards peace. It's so crystal clear. It's obvious, right? But that is what he's calling for, this special investigator. Michael Link. He wants a complete ban, all goods and services produced in Judea and Samaria and in parts of Jerusalem from entering the international market. He's also calling on the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights to complete her database of businesses operating over what they call the Green Line, which they've been working on. They've been working on this list, right, of companies in Judea and Samaria. Where have I heard this before? Making a list of Jewish-owned companies, in this case based on geography. The database could become a template for other global conflicts, he said. He wants this to be the test case. He wants Judea and Samaria, the banning of Judea and Samaria, and the labeling of Jewish products, the discriminating, let's call it what it is, against Jews who live in Judea. He wants that to be the template for other conflicts around the world. I bet you they wouldn't even use it for that. It's only for Judea and Samaria. He also believes in travel bans against Jews from Judea and Samaria, international arrest warrants against Jews who live in Judea or Samaria, and on and on and on. I mean, why not just let him run the BDS movement? I mean, this guy would be the perfect candidate, representative of the United Nations, to run BDS, because that's essentially what he is calling for, the BDS of Jewish companies. And of course, he's hurting Arabs in the process. A database of Jewish businesses, only Jewish businesses. He wants that to be put together ASAP. So that's the key to peace, right? Boycotting Jews, hurting Jewish companies, and throwing Arab employees out onto the street. Michael Link, that's what he told reporters there. Mr. UN investigator, I call him the future head of BDS. At least he would certainly qualify for that position. And finally, this is a great story. The world champion in kickboxing for the under 52 kilogram class of K1 style. This is women's kickboxing. The world champion is now an Israeli woman, Yulia Sachov, who wins the gold medal at the World Championships over the weekend. This is great. Great news. I love this stuff. The competition held in Bosnia. Sachov, 21 years old, from Haifa, defeated her Czech opponent in the finals of the under 52 kilogram. It's about 114-pound weight class. She defeated another woman from Belarus in the semifinals. This is a dream that came true, she said. Everything worked perfectly, telling local media after her win. And there's an amazing picture of her with an Israeli flag saying, "I am world champion." So congratulations there to Yulia Sachkov, representing the state of Israel, winning gold, the champion of kickboxing, world champion of kickboxing. I love ending the show on a positive note, certainly in the world of sports, but just in general, when Israelis succeed in competitions around the world. And that's going to do it for today. If you missed any part of the show, you can go back and check it out on demand. For this week's edition of Israel Uncensored, on the Land of Israel Network at thelandofisrael.com, Josh Hasten here for the 29th of Tishrei, 28th of October, 2019. Hope you're doing well in your part of the world. Shout out to Ben Bresky, for all the work he does, and Tabitha Epstein getting these shows up for you, our listeners. Get in touch with me one last time. Get in touch with me during the week, Josh at thelandofisrael.com. On Facebook, it's Joshua Hasten or Josh Hasten Israel Advocacy and Journalism. On Twitter, at Josh Hasten, and now on Instagram as well. I just took a class in Instagram to try to get that thing up and running, because I guess it's for a younger generation, Instagram, but apparently more people who are not in their teens are also utilizing Instagram to get the word out about different things, but in this case about the reality going on here in the state of Israel. So I hope to use that platform more and more. Between now and when we speak again, please God, next Monday, the holidays are over. Back to business, folks. Back to more podcasting here on the Land of Israel Network. Most importantly, wherever you are in the wonderful world of ours, be safe. Have a wonderful week from just outside the old city walls of Jerusalem, the eternal capital of the Jewish people. Shalom, shalom. Be safe.
Torah thoughts and inspiration from the heartland of Israel. Tune in every week to The Soul of Israel with Rabbi Shlomo Katz on the Land of Israel Network at thelandofisrael.com.